What is the shape of green with biomimicry is the title of this piece. Shape, by shape I mean form. Architects love forms. And green, of course, is the green movement, is green technology. Biomimicry really is about copying not directly the forms in nature, but what lies behind them. In other words, the processes that produce the forms. First, I'd like to go back to the famous phrase that architects follow, the dictum, form follows function, which was said first by Louis Sullivan, who built the building you can see on the left, which is an office block with shops underneath, a mixed development, way back in 1904. And on the right, you see Eastgate, 1996, about 100 years later. After stating form follows function, Louis Sullivan said all things in nature have a shape which tells us what they are. And it was that I want to explore. Louis Sullivan was educated in Paris in the Beaux-Arts tradition, and so he might have learnt about, in fact inevitably would have learnt about Vitruvius, who was Julius Caesar's architect way back in AD 100. These sketches illustrate what he meant, what Vitruvius meant, when he said that fire created society, fire created architecture, as illustrated top right. Fire gave people warmth and extended the day with light, which is really the fundamental beginning of architecture. Some people call this the third skin. The first skin is the skin you were born with. And the second skin is the clothes you wear. And the third skin is the building. I then go straight into nature, and let's test this idea that you should copy processes in nature by studying a process. In Harare, in the late September, October, November, it heats up before the rains. Harare, I should remind you, is in the middle of Zimbabwe, which is a medium tropical country, about 1,400 meters above the sea. Clear skies at night, and it has a long dry season and a short wet season. And before the wet season, you get high air temperatures. Our friends termites live underground in great cities they build. And these towers that I've got pictured here arise rather like earth fountains. The space created by the removal of earth below equals the volume that rises up, except that this volume has a hole in the middle. It's a chimney. And clearly it's used like a breathing apparatus. It's a lung, in fact. To enable them to survive, they need oxygen, and so do their symbiotic fungi that they cultivate. And they need a system that mixes air in exactly the same way as our lungs function. And for that, you need some energy. That energy is provided by the differential between the air temperature above ground and the air temperature below ground. Below ground, it is about 31 degrees centigrade, which I've measured, and it has a very high humidity right through the year. I think the humidity is probably more important than the variation in temperature. However, when the temperature above ground is lower than the temperature in the nest, which is most of the year, you get natural buoyancy, and the air rises up through a hole at the interface between the ground and the sky, and you get natural buoyancy which ventilates the city below. But when the temperature reaches almost the same as the temperature underground, about 31, in the heat up, they begin to suffocate, I think. This is how I think it works. And so they start building a stack. The stack works like any other chimney that we found. It channels the hot damp air, which is lighter than the cold or the even drier air. It's because it has water in it, it's actually lighter, and it with stack effect, and with the effect of the top of the chimney being shaped to create or aid siphonic action from winds blowing horizontally over the top of the chimneys. And they have learnt to form the top of the chimney to optimize this wind energy. It was absolutely fascinating when I discovered this, and I realized that they have a method of forming or building forms which follow the movement of air somehow. So in some strange way, the architect is in fact the wind or the sun acting on it. The other fascinating thing about termites is that they manage to maintain a permanent state of temperature and humidity without being able to plug into the nearest power station. So therefore that became a very important factor when we were designing Eastgate. Eastgate was inspired by the termite towers. As you can see from the picture, that was an early version of how I thought the termite towers worked. Eastgate is an office block, and it has shops below. It is two long slab blocks running north-south on either side of a street, which is what we call the atrium. It's a covered street, but it's open to the public at both ends. And you can see chimneys rising up through the building, showing how air is pumped in at the bottom and forced up through tapered ducts, all made of masonry, up to the rows and rows of chimneys on the top. There are about 48 chimneys, and they're enormous. They're 2 meters in diameter and about 4 meters tall. They are really what we came to call solar accelerators, and they work in the same way as the termites towers. They follow, if you're relying on nature to ventilate your building, you follow the cycles. The day and night cycle in Zimbabwe is always about 10 degrees. So the difference between the night temperature, midnight, and the day noon temperature is above, usually right through the year, above 10 degrees difference. And that is enough to drive an effective buoyancy program to aid added power to the fans. You have to have fans driving it. And what we do is to have day fans and night fans. The night fans blow air through the building at about 6 air changes, between 6 and 10 actually. And during the day, it's only about 2 air changes, which is the correct volume or rate of air, ventilating air for breathing. The offices are surrounded with heat exchangers. The floor is composed of precast units with dentals, and the air is blown through them, cooling them down at night and then they in turn cool the air coming in through them during the day. So they just act as batteries or thermal stores. And we found that we were able to store about 4 degrees of cooling in the teeth just by using night air. We actually made a full-size model and we tested it out. So we knew we were onto a good thing. On the top right, you can see a section through the office, and you can see how the blue is the supply air, is blown under the floors, through the teeth, comes out underneath the window, and then rises up with heat of people and machines to the ceiling, where there are vaults guiding the air along with the light fittings to holes on one side, where there are then horizontal ducts carrying the exhaust air out to the chimneys. The other thing we did was to worry about the outside of the building, observing the cacti in the desert. We knew there was something about surface area that affects the efficiency of absorbing day heat from the sun and getting rid of it to back radiation at night. So you need to see, when you're looking at the outside of the building, in fact, any part of the building, there's a day mode and a night mode. The night mode is to harvest Kuth. The day mode is to protect against direct heat from the sun. If you make an architecture with smooth surfaces, it's far more efficient at absorbing solar heat and far less efficient at getting rid of it at night. You need a prickly building, like the cactus. Prickles have huge surface area, and you can see they have shadows because the sun falling on them comes from one direction at a time. And then at night, the black space is all around the building, and therefore radiant heat can escape in many directions. So that, again, large surface area is of enormous importance for efficiency. So there you are. That explains the fingers. The architecture is prickly. The west and the east is even more prickly. This is an east end. And because that gets the morning sun on one side and the afternoon sun on the other. The north and south elevations are covered in prickles and plants. Plants have another speciality in nature. They have many leaves. The leaves are very efficient at dispersing heat. They not only absorb the heat from the sun in the form of photons, light, which they need for photosynthesis, but that's a small amount compared with the heat loss or heat dispersal of many surfaces, picking up very small surfaces, picking up solar heat, and it runs, the heat runs to the edge of the leaf and out. So the smaller the leaf, in fact, is more efficient at heat dispersal, which is why you find that the hotter the climate, the smaller the leaf generally with trees. In fact, if you sit under a tree in the middle of the day with the sun beating down, you'll find it's about 7 degrees cooler than sitting under the same area of a parasol, where you just have canvas between you and the sun. 7 degrees difference. And that is all about surface area and the rate at which heat is dispersed from the center of the surface to the edge and into the air. So that's an important addition to increasing surface area on the outside in order to make the building modify the climate inside. Inside, between the two blocks, I described a street. This street has corridors and lifts hanging over it. It's a public thoroughfare, but by getting permission to hang things over the street, you can remove those spaces from the buildings on either side, which there are spaces or volumes which don't have to be air conditioned, again increasing the efficiency of the building. It's a sort of intermediate zone. Also, a narrow street running from the east to the west always has one side, because of the movement of the sun, in shadow, and that absorbs the heat from the street, as you will find when you're walking through the heat of the day in an Italian city. When the sun is overhead in Italy, people go to sleep, they have a siesta. But in the morning and the evening, you get that lovely cool absorption from one side of the street, which is in shadow. So there we have Eastgate, this huge building with 48 chimneys, low rise. The building behind it, top on the left, is a building with aluminium and windows and a lot of glass. Eastgate has only 25% of the area facing the sun on the north and the south. And that makes a huge difference for heat absorption. It reduces natural light, but light is heat. The other thing is that the lower the building, and the more spread out it is, you can actually save energy in building and energy in running with lifts. Now, this was a building designed with engineers, very good engineers, of Arab, and I had the London office working on it as well as the Zimbabwe office. And we actually had data loggers logging the performance of the building for 3 years after it was finished and fully occupied. And the graph on the left here shows the diurnal swing and the different behaviors of the internal temperatures on different surfaces in an office. Generally, there are all sorts of oddities. Monday tended to be cooler than Tuesday, and so on. So towards the end of the week, the building was getting too hot or losing the advantage of night cooling. And that we were able to adjust by the timing of the fans. And we knew that eventually to take this principle further forward, you would need to control both surfaces with the external temperature using thermostats. We didn't do that in this case. It's absolutely simple. There's just two fans, and we relied entirely on the timing of turning them off and turning them on, and changing the velocity of the air running through the building. And it took nearly 2 years to get this building tuned properly with the weather. So any building in which passive ventilation or systems are used, you have to tune them in with the weather cycles at site. And as you can hear me, I'm talking about two systems. One is active and one is passive. The active system is where you're adding power to the system. And passive is where you're using nature. It's responding to the forces of nature in order to achieve the comfort levels you need. Now the levels you need are very, very well illustrated on the study we did comparing Eastgate with other buildings in Harare. Some of them one of them, the green one, naturally ventilated, and all the others are with normal conventional air conditioning systems. You can see the red column on the far right is the building behind Eastgate compared with Eastgate, which is in yellow. And it proves that following this system of design with passive and active, you can actually reduce the energy use, energy consumption, by at least 50% without any difficulty. Now, buildings and cities use about 50% of total energy consumption on the planet. So you're talking about reducing the 50% by another 50. So it's a huge advantage changing the design to green. Now we go back to the two buildings that I started with. On the right now is Louis Sullivan's Form Follows Function building, in which he was really celebrating the use of steel frame and glass. He loved glass. But in St. Louis, there's a lot of sun, and there's a cold winter, very cold winter. Or in Chicago, this one actually is. And Chicago has a particularly nasty winter. So you need to add to that facade in some way. And in a way, what I've done at Eastgate is it's the same, exactly the same function. It's an office block with shops below. But look at all the greenery, the added pieces which change the shape